Hi. In this lecture and in the upcoming lectures, we are going to discuss about the functions and workings of a software called Final Cut Pro. This is a video editing software which is used in the industry both in video and film. Final Cut Pro is a professional software which was developed by Macromedia Incorporated and later taken up by Apple Incorporated. Apple is the company that makes Macintosh computers, and so Final Cut Pro is a software which only runs on Macintosh computers. The version that was first released was Final Cut Pro 3, which was way back in the year 1999 in NAB. Later, the video industry in America took this software and started developing television shows. It was not before 2002 that the first Hollywood film called The Rules of Attraction was released, which was entirely edited on this software. This proved to the world that Final Cut Pro is efficient enough to handle the complex pull-down method used for film editing. After this, the version that was released was called Final Cut Pro 4, but this was a special case because here Final Cut Pro became Final Cut Studio with a host of other softwares like Motion, Lifetype, Compressor and Cinema Tools. They were all bundled together and was called Final Cut Studio. The versions kept on upgrading itself till it reached Final Cut 7. In these lectures, we are going to discuss the functions of Final Cut 7. Although the version that is released now is called Final Cut 10, we are going to work on Final Cut 7, which is still the most popular software version of Final Cut. Final Cut 7 is so popular that most of the television shows are edited and most of the films in India are edited on these softwares till now. Before we get into the functions and workings of the software, we need to discuss about the basic principles on which the software work. The first one and the most important one is the concept of destructive and non-destructive editing. Let me give you an example. Say for example, we have a Word file, maybe a Microsoft Word file, and you have made a few corrections here and there. Maybe you have changed a few words, maybe you have added a few lines or corrected a spelling. In that case, if you save the file, you lose the original source file. This is the concept of destructive editing. Let me give you another example. You must have heard about audio cassettes. In audio cassettes, when you record a song over a pre-recorded song, the previous song is lost forever. You won't be able to get back to the original song ever. This is also an example of destructive editing. Video editing softwares do not follow the method of destructive editing. What they follow is called non-destructive editing. In this case, the source file is never disturbed. It is only referred to as a video data, and all that is done, say in terms of effects, transitions, putting titles, everything is recreated and regenerated. So nothing happens to the source file and we get another video file which is different from the source file. This is an example of non-destructive editing. The next concept that needs to be very clear before working on Final Cut is the concept of analog and digital. Video editing was essentially analog in nature. When we talk about analog signals, we usually mean analogous signal, which is electrical in nature, and continuous. So digital, on the other hand, is a signal which is discrete in nature. From the analogous signal, which is a continuous signal, we take samples or specific information from the sine curve and store them on a digital platform. Say, for example, a hard disk. This becomes a digital data. Digital data is stored in the form of zeros and ones. So if you have a word file, say for example, you have series of zeros and ones stored on your hard disk. To read this file, you need an interpreter. If the case is of a Microsoft Word file, the interpreter would be Microsoft Word, the software which everyone knows. Microsoft Word can read this file and will present to you a file which is readable by any human being. This gives us the concept of codec. Codec is a word that has come from the word coder and decoder. Both put together gives us the word codec. Codec is basically a formula. When we are recording a digital data, which is a video file in nature, we need a codec to interpret that video file. With that codec, we can see the file as a video file, which is a series of running images. Digital data is recorded in terms of bits and bytes. 1000 bytes make 1 kilobyte. 1000 kilobytes make 1 megabyte. And 1000 megabytes make 1 gigabyte. And then we have petabytes, zettabytes, yottabytes, exabytes, and so on. The figures are going to rise in the future. So this is the method with which digital data is stored. When you're working with video files, obviously be ready to work with a few terabytes of material. So what is digital editing? Digital editing uses softwares to run digital data, which is in the form of video files, and produce enhanced video through that software. So in our case, we are going to use the software Final Cut Pro to produce, enhance, change, modify, do whatever with the video file and generate new video files, which is a film complete in nature. Obviously, the process is going to be non-destructive. Remember, non-destructive editing would mean that we are not going to change the source files. The next concept that we are going to discuss about is linear and non-linear editing. Non-linear editing was in place from the early days of cinema, when editors used to use film strips. But what is the concept? Let's take an example of 5 ropes that you connect with each other, say rope 1 to rope 5. So the order of the connection would be 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. In this case, if I tell you that change the position of rope 2 and take it to the position of rope 5 and bring rope 5 to the position of rope 2. So now the order would be 1, 5, 3, 4 and 2. If I give you this example and if I give you a rope, you will be able to do it. That is not an issue at all. This is the concept of non-linear editing. In case of film editing, we join film strips one after the other. Say in a sequence I have 10 shots. So I will join these 10 shots, physical film strips, one after the other. In any case, if I need to change it, I can do it by just interchanging the position of the shot, by physically changing the position. But when video came in as a concept, linear editing came into place. Let me go back to the original example given to you during destructive and non-destructive editing, where I gave you an example with an audio cassette. Again, let's imagine you have 10 songs recorded on that audio cassettes, song 1 to song 10. Now if I tell you that I don't want song 2 in that place and I want song 10 in place of song 2, this is not possible for you to do. It's only possible when you either rub off the entire song list from song 2 to song 10 or physically cut the tape, which is not possible. This is the concept of linear editing. In case of Final Cut Pro, which is obviously on a digital platform, we are going to follow the concept of non-linear editing, where any shot can be placed in place of any shot, and you can interchange shots at your own will. Before starting our work with Final Cut Pro software, let us talk about the editing setup. What do we essentially need in an editing setup? We can also start working on a laptop, but for the professional work, we need a particular setup. In that case, we first need a Macintosh computer with keyboards and mouse attached. Secondly, we need a monitor. A monitor can be a broadcast monitor or even a normal television. We need this for judging the image on an analog device, which is a monitor in this case, because computer monitors may not give you the exact result. For transferring material from your tapes to the computer, we need a VTR. A VTR is a player for professional cassettes. High-end cameras have their own recording systems, which may be connected to the computer for data transfer. If the cameras that we are using are recording the material on chips or hard disks, we need to connect those hard disks to the computer for transfer. We will deal with high-end transfers and tape transfers in our upcoming lectures. Now, we are going to talk about formats. Formats were developed by different companies from time to time, starting from Panasonic to JVC, Sony, etc. The standard started with D1 and it went on till D6. All these standards were uncompressed data, which was huge in nature. Only high-end systems could record and play these cassettes. D7 is the first standard amongst the digital standards which was meant for consumers. D7 is the standard that we often see in form of mini DV tapes, DV-cam tapes, Panasonic tapes, and so on. So D7 is a standard which, when recorded on a mini DV tape, becomes a DV-cam format. D7, when recorded on a Panasonic tape, becomes a DVC Pro format tape. In the coming episodes, we are going to discuss how to deal with D7 tapes in Final Cut Pro, like logging, capturing and editing D7 material. We know that television was first launched in America, which was essentially a black and white television. But with the coming of color, NTSC was the standard that was developed by the American television. NTSC, the full form being National Television System Committee, was a particular signal standard that was developed for color television. Remember, millions of households had still black and white television in place. So, it was necessary for developing a standard which could serve both black and white television and color television at the same time. 13-15 years later, another standard was developed which was called PAL. PAL is a standard that was later taken up by India as their broadcasting standard. So whatever work we do, we usually do on the PAL standard. But this is limited to the broadcasting only. If I want to shoot a material on NTSC, edit it and maybe burn a DVD which is NTSC in nature, there is no problem. These standards are only meant for broadcasting. The NTSC and the PAL standards were developed with this thing in mind, that the electrical pulses in different countries are different in nature. In some cases, the electrical frequency is 50 Hz, say in case of Asia, India and African countries, and in other countries they are 60 Hz. The standard that was developed had 60 fields where the electricity was at 60 Hz. The frame rate was thus at 30 per second. In case of PAL, the frame rate is 25 because the electrical frequency was 50 Hz. Within 50 Hz, we could manage 50 fields of interlaced video. PAL NTSC both follow a particular number of scan lines, frame rates and color distribution system. We are going to talk about all these in details in our later episodes. The broadcast that we see on our television is standard definition. Standard definition or SD means that I have 720 by 576 pixels when we are talking about PAL resolution. High definition is a term that is commonly used for better quality pictures. High definition is basically 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. Between standard definition and high definition, we have intermediate resolutions like 1280 by 720 and 1440 by 1080. Is it possible for us to telecast such huge amount of data through satellite? It is actually compressed. You must remember the concept of zipping a file. Say for example, we have a Microsoft Word file which is, say for example, 2 MB in size. But when we zip it, it becomes a few KBs in size. This is called compression. Compression can be lossy, where we actually lose data, or lossless in case of Microsoft Word file, where we do not lose anything. When we unzip the file, we get back the 2 MB that we originally had. HD broadcast actually uses lossy compression method, where the HD data is compressed and telecasted. This is the advantage of digital data or digital video editing. Analog signal, on the other hand, cannot compress. If I need to compress analog signal, I'll have to reject signals, which in turn gives me inferior quality of image. But digital data can be compressed, and yet we do not lose anything in terms of image quality. In the next episode, we are going to deal with the interface of the software Final Cut Pro.